Hello, welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin, and this is the programme where you can have your property-related questions answered by our team of experts. And joining me today are Trisha Pegg, Real Life Group co-founder. Welcome to you.
Thank you.
John Howard, property developer, author, public speaker. I'm very pleased to say that John's chosen this programme to come out and give us the benefit of his property knowledge.
That's very kind. What a nice introduction. Thank you, Stephen. I'm delighted to be here.
There we are. And then we have the other joint co-founder of Real Life Group, Mark Harvey. Welcome to you, Mark.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you. Good. Right. Well, we'll get straight on with the questions, and we'll start with you, Trish. I'm trying to research my subject before entering into the property investment world with either a buy-to-let property or an HMO. Could the panel please explain the difference between an HMO with, say, around 6 ensuite rental units and converting the same property into 4 or 5 self-contained flats?
Okay, so obviously it is a building regulations and planning change between the two units. You could have a mixture of the two. So there's another option to add where you could do more studio bedsit style, which is what they used to be. HMO rooms used to be called bedsits, which is why on a lot of the licence regulation applications.
That's what you and I remember.
We remember them as beds. We had them as bedsits.
They were
we used to do bedsits.
They all had their own little facilities.
Yeah.
So you could do a mixture of the two, which will fetch you a higher rental. Now, so you've got your double ensuite rooms, or like you said, you've got your more self-contained apartments. The difference between that and a HMO standard room is going to be the square footage that you're going to have to provide. So to have like legal sized flats and apartments, there is a certain square meterage that you're going to have to adhere to in regards to separating them into units. And also, are you going to split the titles? Are you going to split the meters? Are you going to make them total self-contained units? Or are you still going to run it in a HMO style? Whereas if you're looking at doing a more bedsit style, longer term rental unit, which could be studio bedsit. So you'll have an HMO double ensuite room, but it just means you'll put a kitchenette style in the corner or somewhere in the room itself. It does need to be slightly bigger than a standard double ensuite room. However, it's got a longer term tenant and it is more like a studio, but it still falls under the HMO register. The only thing that changes than a normal HMO room is the building regulations will be different. So you'll have to do like thermaline boarding and soundproofing, and there's a bit more of an upgrade in the building spec that you're going to have to do for the renovation.
What legally determines the difference?
So it is like the building regulations. That definitely, there's a lot more you have to do if you're going to be putting kitchenettes in rooms, and you will have to give more fire risk, things like that, because obviously they've got individual cooking facilities in every single room. You may then have to also, depending on your council, have a breakout room, is what I call it, where you have like a utility space. So if you're unable to provide wash facilities in the bedrooms because of the size, then you're going to have to provide a separate little communal space where it's got washer dryers, and maybe just put an additional fridge out there or something is what we like to do, just to give them an extra facility. Maybe if there's space, an extra kitchenware and maybe a little corner, breakfast bar, something like that, just to give an additional space for sharing, to create that co-living environment that people love.
Spoils them, doesn't she, Stephen? In our day, you had a baby belling in the corner, wouldn't you? a sink unit, a baby belling cooker, which were fortune second-hand because everyone wanted to buy them second-hand. Do you remember?
Yes, I do.
And a Yale lock on the old and a bed, and that would be it.
They are like
Happy
little
days.
mini hotels, but I
And
think
you have to
like
put shillings in the meter instead of a key.
We used to put 5 pences. You used to have 5p's in the meter. You used to collect them every month. All these 5p's.
People are still doing that,
No.
There's a meter to use for the washer and dryer units. I was really smart because I was like, well, hang on, because I'm including bills in this. But really, to answer the question, the difference between the 2 or 3 now options available is, one, with a HMO, generally, you can use it with bills included. You're going to make a nice high cash flow. The renovation will be slightly less if you're just doing double ensuite rooms, but then the tenancy turnover may be a little higher. If you're doing proper apartments that you're going to need a larger square footage, it will mean you can't maybe do as many as 6. You might need to do a lower amount in the actual property itself. And obviously, building regulations inspections will be an extra cost, etc. So you may not make as high as an income in regards to your spend on the total project costs, but again, they will have a longer term tenancy period, so that will help you in that regard. And it could end up with, if you split the titles, have a tenant buyer situation, so you can have a mixed strategy. But if you do the bedsit style, you can charge a higher rent, have a longer term tenancy, and just have a greatly commercially valuable unit at the end.
Okay, thank you very much. John, your question.
Yes.
With leasehold property, especially where the practice is widespread in London, residents have at least the option of being able to insist on buying the freehold of their block from the developer or owner. To do this, in excess of 50% of the owners need to agree to do this as a collective. The problem is that with a huge amount of overseas investment and ownership in these blocks, getting an international consortium of owners together, and in some cases to even get responses, becomes almost impossible. Do the panel think that there needs to be significant reform in the leasehold legislation to make these purchase options more achievable?
Well,
I suppose, sorry, just one other thing I want to just add in there as well. It's also quite difficult. Landlords are very reluctant to hand over the data about the other tenants.
Stephen, I don't think we're
because
all
the latest data protection laws.
Well, there is that, yeah. Okay, so it's very interesting, this, because first of all, I think it's 50% of the qualifying tenants.
Okay.
So I think some of the ones that don't live there don't qualify.
Okay.
The law has changed a little bit in the last couple of years. They keep modifying it, the government do. But there's big changes, I think, in leasehold properties coming up. And I think what's going to happen, I think, and I've had a whisper, as other people have, I'm sure, I think they're going to do away with ground rent completely.
Really?
Now, if they do that, that is a huge change to how it is now, where the ground rent might double every 25 years. They've already brought in an issue, well, it's not law, but they've a suggestion, a recommendation that all the building societies have taken up, that if you buy a flat, the ground rent mustn't be any more than 0.1% of the value of the flat. And then you're allowed to RPI, retail price index, the uplift. And this has all come about really because a very large house builder up north was selling leasehold houses, which is up north was quite traditional, funnily enough, to do so. And they were doubling the ground rent every 10 years.
But quite unnecessary. Really.
Totally unnecessary, and we're just being greedy. And really, they've spoilt it almost for everyone else. And it's not right. And of course, yes, the law is you can take the freehold off an owner and manage it themselves. They can all share the cost of it and buy it and so on. So the government have gone a long way already, but I think they're going to go even further. Yeah.
I think you have to be careful here. There's no point in demonising leasehold. I mean, leasehold was brought in so that at least one person could effectively run the good development and protect everybody's...
Absolutely, and there's nothing wrong with a good long leasehold flat. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever, Stephen. And someone has to share the organise the share of the responsibilities of the flat. So the cost, the maintenance, the repairs, and the insurance, and so on. So, but I think there's big changes afoot, I think.
Okay, thank you for that, John. Mark, your question. You need your crystal ball for this one then. I know that house prices have now risen for the first time in ages, almost countrywide. Do the panel think this trend will continue for the rest of 2020 and perhaps beyond?
Really interesting. I mean, my opinion is that how can anyone possibly know? That's just my opinion. I mean, people may claim to know what's going to happen. People may claim that and put information together and say, you know, this is what's going to happen. I don't think anybody really knows. But if that question is around because they want to be in property, they want to start investing in property, or the question is, do I need to continue or do I need to change strategy? Then I think that's where you need to be set up, where you're agile enough to be, and you have different strategies that cater for market going up, market going down, and you can protect yourself as well. You can protect yourself if something does change, because people were saying to us before, it was like, oh wow, you know, if you're getting these high commercial valuations, then what happens if the market drops? Well, nothing, because unless I'm forced in some way to need to sell. So then it's like, how can I set my business up to cater for that? But it is really interesting because I think And then again, this is just a whisper that I heard, is there is a whole generation, I think they're classed as the baby boomers, the whole generation.
All the 60s, in their 60s now, probably.
Yeah, soon enough. Like there is a whole generation of people that are going to die, and then they're going to be leaving assets that they have
lots of money
to their kids. Now, what happens to those? You know, they don't then go living. Not most of them.
They all become.
They want to sell them.
It's happening now. You know, if you've got quite a nice home, it could well be worth 400,000 or 500,000. You know, both parents die and there's 2 children, they get 200,000-300,000 each.
That's what I'm saying.
A lot of money.
If there's multiple,
it's a lot of money. I mean, the one thing I would say is that they're predicting a 3% rise across the UK in house prices this year. But of course, it's a micro market. For instance, there's a place quite near Ipswich called Dis, which went up 10% last year. Now, there's other places that went down.
Hashtag Ipswich.
Hashtag Ipswich. Ipswich went up 5% last year. So, you know, it's a micro market. So it's not just one big market. There's lots of little markets.
Well, I think that's the point, John, is it when people talk about the property market, what on earth
what
do
they
mean?
talk about? Yeah. The worst performing place in the whole of the UK over the last 3 years on time to sell a property was Mayfair.
Okay.
The worst.
All right, well, that's all we've got time for in this half of the programme, so join me again after the break. Hello, welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and joining me are Trisha Pegg. Hi, welcome back. John Howard, welcome back. And Mark Harvey. Trisha, another question relating to tenants and the government. The government have announced that they're going to legislate to allow the presence of pets in all apartment homes. Albeit contrary to most lease terms, do the panel think this is really a sensible course of action?
So it's like multi-units. So the challenge that I have with this is I'm an animal lover myself, but as a landlord of multi-unit strategies, the main challenge here is that if this was something that is kind of a forced aspect, which it sounds like, this is going to create a tenant demand problem, because the reason I don't allow pets is because what if one tenant has a cat, then the other 5 people are allergic, and then it creates a problem and an infestation in the property. Also, you're attracting other things. Now, again, I would say, what's the moral compass with this? Because if it's something like a HMO room or even a studio bedsit room, they're not very big. How humane is that on the animal? And a lot of multi-unit apartments and things like that don't even have a garden space. So if it's a dog, where do they go do their business? You know, I like the idea that they're kind of saying, hey, pets are allowed and all of that, because I love them myself.
Yeah, you've said that.
But I just, I'm not sure.
But John,
Can I just butt it? I mean, I think what you've said is absolutely right. It'll be a nightmare for your hundreds and hundreds of HMOs you've got, you two. By the way, it'll be a nightmare
John,
for you.
You're an
Yeah,
agent.
I don't like it.
Quiet enjoyment. That's what it says in every lease. It'll say in your leases, I'm sure. Quiet enjoyment. How on earth can you have quiet enjoyment if you've got a dog barking all day? Next day, that's very good. I think that's a little poodle or chihuahua. But you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And the problem is, there must be a way of stopping these people having these pets. What we do with our flats is we give a letter allowing them to have a pet, but it can be rescinded at any time should they
cause
be a
a problem.
And that's what I think will happen in reality as well, won't it, Mark? Surely.
I think it doesn't make any sense to me at all.
No.
And I don't
Sounds
even know
like a
why
vote winner.
anybody is putting time and effort into even talking
worrying
about
about
this.
it.
Well,
Yeah,
what is that
why?
about?
Well, we are.
Mark, I did a programme the other day, and I just had to say to our housing minister, for heaven's sake, they're going to legislate that all new houses that are built are going to have a fruit tree in the garden.
Yeah.
Well, do you honestly think a young couple gives a,
I've got an orchard.
About Granny Smith.
Can I just say, I've got an orchard. It's very nice in the summer. I get my apples in the September off it and give them to the horses.
Make an apple crumble.
This is fiddling around the periphery of the property market.
Ridiculous.
And it's crazy. And I mean, I've been involved with some big blocks down here in Docklands, and I can't tell you the amount of times people have come up and they said, boss, somebody's thrown a rabbit or a dog or a cat in the rubbish room because their tenants is finished and they just left it
terrible.
there. We've had RSPCA called numerous times
What sort
because
of neighbours has he got?
no, but you hear
dear
animals in distress in these glass buildings where it gets hot.
Yeah.
People won't leave the aircon on all day, so they turn it off. The pet gets very hot and distressed. I mean, you have to accept surely that some places are just not
suitable for animals. I agree entirely with you. It seems crazy.
And especially with like HMO rooms, we supply all the furnishings
You're worried now,
and
aren't
all
you?
the soft furnishing. I'm frustrated a little bit by this actually, because imagine that room, then the person moves out in however long they've stayed there for, and then the next person that comes in,
the cost has to go up.
The cost has to go up because the next person that moves in, if they've got a dog, cat, or whatever
had a
allergy,
cat,
I've got to replace all the soft furnishings, which is all the mattresses and everything. No way. I'm sorry. I'm going to put my foot down on this.
Well, you could talk to your thing to do is to talk to your local MP. That's what he's there for. Talk to your local MP and see what they can do about it.
It's my property. Surely, I'm sorry, but this
you
is,
can speak to the chairman of the local Conservative Party
and I'll do it for you.
Yeah, but it's just going to cause more issues because then there'll be more landlords saying, "Oh well, you didn't pass.
I agree.
You didn't pass our referencing."
I don't know if it's a white paper yet or not, which is the first is what they have, a white paper, and then it becomes law. I'd be surprised if it gets through.
I'm very anti the
doesn't make
government
sense.
fiddling about with this. You know, we're talking this nonsense about pets, fruit trees.
I mean, the tree thing's not a bad idea.
They're talking now about sort of no-fault evictions. Well, when assured shortholds were brought in, they were brought in the late 80s to encourage landlords to go into the housing market to ease the
because you can
supply.
get vacant possession when you want to.
Exactly. And they're just going backwards on this. It's crazy. All right, John.
Yes.
I know you're going to be good on this one.
Oh, no pressure.
With still many properties having flammable cladding, and the occupants of many of these properties struggling to finance its replacement, what does the panel think that the government should do to help residents in this impossible position? Should it not be the responsibility of perhaps the local authorities whose building regulations authorise the use of such cladding? Now that's interesting.
It's
isn't
a
it?
very, very interesting point, and you're right. I do know a lot about it because of the block we've just done in Ipswich, which is non-combustible. A lot of the blocks that are up have non-combustible cladding anyway. A lot do have it, it's correct. But what they don't have is at every level you need a fire break at every level. And that wasn't the law or wasn't a building regulation necessary 10, 20 years ago. So they need fire breaks at every level. And that is still quite expensive to do. It's not as expensive as the whole cladding, but it's still expensive. Now the government have put, I think, £200 million aside to support people and help pay for this cladding, if it's similar to Grenfell. But if it's not similar to Grenfell, it doesn't qualify. So far, how many people, or how many blocks in the last 2 years have qualified, do you think, for the 200 million, some of the 200 million?
5%?
No idea.
How many?
I don't know, 3.
None.
Wow.
None have got the money. So the government have got to relook at this and I think up the amount. Now you can argue if you own your own flat in a block, and it's working out on average about £30,000–40,000 to contribute each to get the cladding done on most of these blocks. You could argue that you own the flat and it's unmortgageable at the moment while it's not done, and it's potentially fire risk as well. You could argue that it's your problem. If you owned your own house, it would probably be your problem. And of course, if you can't pay, the building society are likely to, if you've got a loan, are likely to step in and pay it so you don't forfeit your lease. Because ultimately, if you can't pay the service charge, ultimately, and it would take a lot of court cases, but ultimately you would forfeit your lease.
Yeah.
So they won't allow that to happen. So actually, a lot of these, if you go to your building society and say, look, I haven't got the 40,000, they will lend you the money in the end. They might huff and puff, but they'll lend it to you in the end anyway.
Well, I think that's one of the problems recently. There's been some cases where the building societies have said no.
Well, I think most of them are bluffing,
Stephen.
They're bluffing, Stephen, because ultimately
They're going to have a load of unmortgageable assets.
exactly. So they're not going to do. They're not.
Their security's just
Exactly.
reduced to nothing.
The security's just gone down the toilet till you spend the 40,000, and then it's back up to where it was. So it makes no financial sense whatsoever, because they haven't lent probably more than 75%, 80% on the property anyway, probably. So I think they're bluffing. And if I had anyone in that situation, my advice would keep going back to them, keep at it. Also speak to your local MP.
Okay. So, Mark, your question. What are the options for help for first-time buyers other than shared ownership, which does seem to be very expensive on a monthly basis and may be hard to sell when perhaps your circumstances change? I think I agree with their comments there.
Definitely.
I'm not keen on this shared ownership.
Sounds like they've got personal.
I'm not sure on that shared ownership
model.
It depends what they're talking about. Are they talking about they're just moving in like as a couple?
No, I think what they
shared
mean
ownership model where
the housing association own a certain
where they
percentage.
bought 50% of it and the association own the other half. And they're
So
very
you pay a
hard to sell.
mortgage and you pay rent on top.
Yeah, I'm not a fan. Yeah, I
hasn't really
don't think
worked
that's
for
good.
me.
I think a lot of people who want to buy a home. I know when we were looking to live in a personal home, it was like anytime a shared ownership come on, it was just discarded.
Yeah.
Like,
You're right. You're absolutely right, Mark. They're not that popular because they're hard to sell half a share. You're far better, I think, to actually buy it with a friend. So you can double up and actually buy a property. As long as you've got a good agreement between the two of you.
Yes.
But you're right. I think shared ownership is.
That's one option. But if we're going to talk about that I think the probably one of the most beneficial ways to give you your because it's flexibility, it looks like they don't want to be trapped, is to rent where you live and actually then own places where you're going to make money from.
Yeah, Mark, that's a good idea.
So you're going to rent where you live and then own where you're renting.
I mean, I would say, and I know I bang on about supporting the government, but the government have also got the Help to Buy scheme, which for 5 years they'll lend you a deposit in London up to 40%, which is unbelievable.
Wow.
You pay no stamp duty either when you buy, if you're a first-time buyer. They can't do any more, can they, the government? They've done an amazing job on that.
Well, except in London, you should to stay within the stamp duty threshold.
Always moaning, always finding a reason not to support.
Yeah.
You know what? How many governments in the world have subsidised people buying their own home like that? It's amazing.
Yes, John. But you can also go back to the days of Cameron, where they had even legislation to provide money and facilities for first-time buyers, and the question was asked by the Office of Budget Responsibility the other day, how much of this money had been expended, and oops, it hadn't. It had been spent on other things. Not one single house has been done under that scheme.
Every idea you have, every good idea you have, and I've had, and Trisha had, and Mark's had, they haven't all worked. I've had some fantastic ideas, but they haven't worked, so they weren't fantastic in the end, were they?
Going back to this question, because I like this question, is the fact that, I'm guessing they want a bit more security, they want to raise the standard of living, that's why they want to get on the housing property. So let's just say, for instance, if you're going to put 25k down, whether it's through this Help to Buy scheme or some way I've got to save it, it's like, what about an option where instead of putting this 25k into a house where you're hoping that it increases in value at some point and you can then sell it at the point you want to sell it, so you've got the flexibility, how about you use that 25k or whatever you would put down as a deposit to invest in yourself, so you can educate yourself, train yourself, get yourself around either coaches, mentors, where you can actually then, I know this goes probably against everything that everybody is taught.
It's a different angle, Mark.
Everybody grows up and says, I'm going to go to education and pay thousands for university. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about self-education, where you learn how to make money, learn how to create businesses, learn how to improve yourself as a person. Self-education, personal development, and then you can make more money, and then this won't be such a challenge about getting on the housing market or what it is that you want to do moving forward.
Okay, well, on that note of self-improvement...
Absolutely. We all need to do that, by the way.
I'm going to say a big thank you to Trisha Pegg for coming along.
Thank you.
John Howard,
Pleasure.
Mark Harvey, thank you all very much for your contributions. That's all we've got time for today, so join me next time on Property Question Time.